Good evening. You're watching The Big Story with Haryanto Diman. I'm Olivia Quay.
Coming up on the show, our senior health correspondent tells us what COVID-19 data we should focus on. But before we dive into our stories, if you have not subscribed to this channel, do tap on the red subscribe button down below.
But for job security is more of a concern now in a time of COVID-19. In its latest macroeconomic review, the Monetary Authority of Singapore today said wages are likely to be harder hit than employment.
However, workers in the retail trade, F&B and recreation sectors are most vulnerable to layoffs. This is despite government support measures like wage subsidies and loan schemes.
So let's delve deeper with Chief Economist at OCBC Bank, Selena Ling. Now, Selena, MAS expects wage cuts to occur in various sectors, from transportation and storage services to accommodation and food services, financial services as well. So, does this point to the need for more government aid? For example, the 75% wage subsidy is only for April and May so far. So, do you think that should be extended?
Well, I think the COVID-19 pandemic story obviously is still evolving very rapidly. At this juncture, it's hard to say whether the 75% wage offset should be extended. I think what we recognize is that Singapore is a small open economy. It's not just an issue about Singapore's circuit breaker being lifted on the 1st of June. I think we also have to look in terms of the global economy and the regional lockdowns as well. I think the fact is that even if we do see the circuit breaker being lifted on 1st of June, if the regional economies continue to have infection numbers and continue to have containment measures, that will also have some economic spillover effects on the Singapore economy. So I think net really in terms of the outlook for the industries, a lot of the hardest hit industries would be the tourism and transport related ones, especially including the F&B and retail sector also. We do think that post the circuit breaker, there should be some improvement in terms of demand domestically, but whether this will actually return, to the pre-circuit breaker days, I think at this juncture it still looks very, very tentative. We are expecting that the recovery story in the second half will be a lot more subdued. Whether the government actually wants to extend the job support scheme and also some of the other foreign worker incentives as well, I think at this measure, at this juncture, really is a risk-reward ratio. I think that it would be very unlikely that we'll see a permanent institution of some of these schemes, but they may be open to a temporary extension.
Now, MAS didn't give any forecast figures for retrenchments, but what is your projection and how does it compare to previous recessions?
Well, I think it's very hard to try and put an estimate on how bad the unemployment picture could get, mainly because in the past, even during the Asian financial crisis, it was more economic crisis. During the GFC, it was really more a financial crisis. But this time round, we are having both a healthcare pandemic and on top of that, economic crisis of in terms of the demand shock and global supply chain disruptions as well. So it's a bit of a double whammy. It is very likely that we could actually get unemployment rising above 3%, possibly closer to 4% by the end of the year. What this entails would be that the number of displaced workers could be as high as 65,000. So this would be a bit more severe compared to both the GFC and the AFC. But this picture may also continue to evolve depending on how long the circuit breaker lasts, if it gets lifted earlier, or even to the extent that whether the government continues to put on additional measures like the job support scheme in order to try and mitigate the potential layoff situations and to keep firms on a survival footing until this whole COVID-19 crisis passes. So my sense is that it will continue to deteriorate in the quarters ahead, but some of the pain in the sense is being borne by the government.
Right. Well, I have a two-part question on those employed in the retail, F&B, and recreation industry, some of the sectors that are hardest hit. Would people be more wary of joining these sectors in the future, and what long-term impact would that have?
I think actually even in the run-up to before this whole COVID-19 pandemic, the policy measures in terms of foreign workers was already quite tight, in particular for the F&B and retail services sector. So, in a sense, the players in these areas were actually getting a bit used to trying to move away from intensive manpower usage to a more technology investments and using digital platforms. So I think it just probably accelerated the whole process. I think what will change is that going forward, a lot more of the consumption may be done online. They will probably use a lot more digital platforms and technology instead of manpower. We may not get the case where it returns to business as usual even after this COVID-19 pandemic. I think, if anything, the silver lining from this whole COVID-19 pandemic is that it's accelerated a lot of that digital transformation in a very short period of time. As to whether workers would want to join these sectors, I guess at the end of the day, if the growth prospects are there and the wage prospects remain attractive, then they would want to join these sectors. But as we've seen in the past, because a lot of the retail and F&B face very high overhead structural issues and competition in the industry itself, obviously they do tend to be a little bit more vulnerable to any downturns.
Selena, in its report, MAS noted that the rise in unemployment has historically been associated with higher firm closures in the next quarter. To what extent will government support like the Jobs Support Scheme minimize lasting damage to the economy?
I think the job support scheme in itself basically tries to incentivize firms not to lay off workers in the first instance. So they may explore other cost-cutting measures, like what we have seen in terms of trying to pass on some of the property tax rebates and the rental rebates. Typically, I don't think the job support scheme itself will move the needle that much in terms of preventing firms from going under. I think we have seen from the three budgets, a lot of the measures are trying to tackle this from a holistic front. They're tackling the cash flow issues, they're tackling the credit access, and they're trying to tackle the wage costs during this period of the circuit breaker as well. So I think going forward, I think there seems to be still some openness to using fiscal policy to do the heavy lifting, but I do not think that is the job of the government to prevent firms from going under. I think, in fact, in an efficient and dynamic marketplace, you would always have some churn, some turnover, new entrants, and some exits as well. I think what we will clearly see is that the labor market indicators and also things like company liquidations typically lag the whole economic cycle. So you may actually have growth bottoming in the second quarter, but you will continue to see a pickup in both the unemployment picture and also the potential firm closures in the coming months and quarters.
Well, falling wages and a lower demand for labor, these effects from the pandemic have been known for some time now. So did anything in the MAS review come as a surprise to you, Selena?
Well, I think there are maybe two things that we have to look out for. The macroeconomic review did allude to the very big significant impact on private consumption. In fact, the hit to private consumption amounts to about 60%, comprising mainly of the non-essential services that's affected during this period of the 2-month circuit breaker. So what we'll see is that domestic demand has taken a very, very big hit. So although we do see government policies trying to alleviate some of the pain for both businesses and individuals, I think we may still take a bit of time for demand to recover and for confidence to return. So in that sense, I think the prospects for a recovery in the second half of the year may be still fairly subdued. So in that sense, our full year growth forecast is still probably in the range of a more severe minus 6% contraction. I think the second point really is that fiscal policy is clearly doing the heavy lifting. Monetary policy, as illustrated in the monetary policy statement at the end of March, basically they, after having done the recentering lower and also shifting the senior slope to a zero appreciation bias, essentially I think going forward the focus of monetary policy will be more prioritizing the managing of the liquidity situation and the currency volatility. So I do not expect any near-term monetary easing to come. In fact, if you look at the senior currently, which is hovering around parity of its band, I don't think there's any urgency for a further monetary policy easing at this juncture, and much less an out-of-cycle easing.
All right. Selena, just to round up our discussion today, do you have a timeline for when our economy can bounce back? And on that note also, what are the signs to look out for?
I would say we tentatively hope for a recovery by the second half. Whether it's going to happen in the third quarter, as I alluded earlier, would very much depend on whether the rest of the global and regional economies regain their footing after they start lifting some of the lockdowns. It's very hard to say at this juncture. I mean, even if you look at the IMF scenarios, for instance, when they talk about a global recession of -3%, they actually did have two other worst scenarios where if there are recurrent waves of infection and intermittent containment measures coming back on stream globally, then obviously the hit to the global economy is going to be more severe. I think for Singapore's case, it's also probably in the same boat. We are very much watching whether we'll get a peak and subsequent stabilization in the overall and also the resident infection numbers. And going out from here, whether we will actually see the circuit breaker being lifted on 1st of June, and how fast we actually see a lot of the social distancing and containment measures being gradually wound back. And then, life may slowly recover and get some semblance of normalcy from here. So my best guess would be later part of this year, but I suspect would be closer to the fourth quarter rather than the third quarter.
Well, Selena, thank you so much for your time and analysis. We've been speaking to Selena Ling, Chief Economist at OCBC Bank. The Monetary Authority of Singapore said today that the COVID-19 outbreak will hit wages more than jobs. MAS also said Singapore's economy may contract by more than what was forecast. We want to hear from you, so share your thoughts in the comments.
In other news, the Health Ministry reported 528 new COVID-19 cases as of noon today. 8 Singaporeans and permanent residents are among the new cases.
Migrant workers living in dormitories continue to make up the bulk of the remaining cases, and the exact figure will be released later tonight. The total number of confirmed cases in Singapore is now at 14,951.
2 more patients have died from COVID-19 complications yesterday, bringing the total number of coronavirus-related deaths here to 14. Both patients were Singaporean men aged 81 and 82. The 14 deaths here were all seniors between 64 and 95 years old.
Meanwhile, another 12 residents and 2 employees at Acacia Home in Admiralty have tested positive for COVID-19. The 14 of them were tested on Sunday after a 62-year-old resident at the welfare home tested positive the night before. A total of 167 people at the home were tested, of which the remaining 153 tested negative. Contact tracing is ongoing.
We're dealing with a lot of numbers these days. The number of new cases, total number of cases, how many are coming from the dorms, how many community cases, and so on. Senior health correspondent Salma Khalik joins us now to tell us what figures we should be paying attention to and why. Salma, in a piece today, you wrote that the more important data is the number of cases in the community. Where does that give a better idea of how Singapore is doing in our fight against the virus?
Hello. Well, we are getting lots of different figures. The overall figure is quite scary, but it does not reflect the circuit breaker measures because a lot of these cases are in foreign worker dormitories. If you want to know whether the circuit breaker measures are working, then you really need to look at the cases in the community, whether they are Singaporeans and PRs or whether they are also employment pass workers who are living in the community.
But Salma, if we focus on just the number of community cases, do we risk not getting a fuller, more comprehensive picture of our fight against the virus then?
No, actually, all the figures are important, right? It depends very much on what you want to extract from those figures. So overall figures, very important. Number of people in hospitals, very important. Number of people in intensive care, equally important. So it depends very much on what information you want to extract. My point is, if you're looking at whether the circuit breaker measures are working, then you should concentrate on the community cases. But if you're looking at whether it's time to ease the circuit breaker measures, then you have to look at all the cases because even the dormitory workers, when the circuit breaker measures ease, will be coming out into the community to work. So at different points along this continuum, you need to look at different figures, and they tell you different things.
All right. Now, Salma, on that note, the escalating number of dormitory infections has been a cause of concern for several weeks now. Even though the numbers are high, workers in the dorms are now isolated from the rest of the population. And you wrote that the high numbers are due to Singapore's aggressive and strategic testing. What would be the best way to describe the current situation in the dorms?
Quite bad. No. Okay. There are good points and bad points actually about it. Although a lot of people will say there's nothing good about people getting sick, but in this case, a lot of the foreign workers are younger and healthier people. They had already decanted, moved out the older foreign workers to protect them. Now, among the younger workers, as of yesterday, not a single one of the thousands of workers who have got COVID-19 have needed intensive care. So that's very good news because it means that they're getting it mildly. And a lot of these people who were identified as COVID-19 patients actually were not even sick or had such mild symptoms. But because we are now testing a lot of them, people who are in contact with those who have been diagnosed, we are finding them. If we didn't do that, we wouldn't have found them.
Well, moving away from the dorms, the Health Ministry now splits the non-dormitory cases into two categories: Singaporeans, permanent residents, and foreigners on an employment pass in one category, and foreign worker permit holders not living in dormitories in the other. So, how is this splitting of the information useful?
Yeah, actually, I asked the ministers that at yesterday's press conference, and Health Minister Gan Kim Yong explained that the reason they did the split was because they wanted to find it easier to trace the epidemiological root of the virus. In other words, he says because these two groups have fairly distinct characteristics, your locals as well as your foreigners here with families are more likely to get the virus as well as spread the virus to family members. Whereas the foreign workers who are living in shop houses or in dormitories with their fellow workers, the likelihood is they may get it through work because some of these are still in essential services and they are working. A lot of them are construction workers. So this merely helps the government identify and track cases. But they've been very open. I mean, they've given us those numbers. So it's up to us if we want to add them up, which I think should be done, to give a real picture for the community.
That was the Straits Times senior health correspondent, Salma Khalik. Thanks very much, Salma. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show.
The link to Salma's story is in the description below if you're watching us on YouTube. Let's now cross to Dylan Ang for what's making headlines around the world.
Thanks, Haryanto and Olivia. The number of coronavirus cases worldwide has crossed the 3 million mark. The worst-hit nation, the US, has more than 1 million cases alone. The global death toll is believed to be more than 211,000. Across the causeway, Malaysia's Deputy Health Minister Noor Azmi Ghazali, along with a Perak Executive Council member, have pleaded guilty for breaching the country's movement control order. The duo were charged earlier today, together with 13 others, after they were all pictured sharing a meal following the minister's visit to a local clinic. The men have been ordered to pay a 1,000 ringgit fine in default of 1 month's jail. Australia's New South Wales state reopened beaches today, including the popular Bondi Beach and 2 neighbouring beaches in Sydney. New South Wales also announced that it will allow up to 2 adults to visit another person's home from Friday, relaxing a ban on non-essential movement. And more than 20 film festivals around the world will stream movies free on YouTube after the pandemic forced the cancellation of several annual showcases. The 10-day We Are One, a global film festival, will feature content curated by the Cannes, Berlin, Venice, Sundance, Toronto and Tribeca film festivals, among others, and it will begin on May 29th. Audiences can look forward to free films, documentaries, music, comedy and conversations, but are encouraged to donate to the World Health Organization's COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund. That's all we have for our global updates. Back to you guys.
It's been almost a month since the circuit breaker was implemented. While it has been a difficult period for Singaporeans, 5 groups of people whom the Sunday Times spoke to have responded to the circuit breaker measures in creative ways that make our lives a tad better.
Yesterday, we spoke to one of them, Madam Rahima Rahim, who's behind the Get Well Card project, which aims to educate children about the social impact of COVID-19 and dispel notions of racism.
For our Heroes Made at Home segment today, we have the man behind the creative thank you posters for delivery riders, Mr. Pann Lim. The idea is simple. People can download the posters from the website, add on them as they like, and stick them on their doors. Hi, Pann. Now, we understand that you started this project with your colleagues in your creative agency, Kinetic Singapore. Could you tell us more about this project? How did the idea come about?
Hi, thanks for having me, guys. So what happened was, I think even before the circuit breaker, we ourselves already use quite a lot of delivery services actually when we deliver stuff. So when the circuit breaker kicks in, and we obviously rely a lot on food delivery and sending our parcel work things. One of our colleague, senior creative, thought of this idea that maybe we should thank them because contactless delivery need not be heartless. So that became like a point of discussion. Then from then, within a week, we actually launched the whole initiative.
Well, Pann, we understand you actually have received feedback from some who commented that your resources could be better spent on a more serious industry amid this outbreak, for example, healthcare workers. So why did you decide to focus on delivery riders?
So I think for us, we are also as a creative agency, what we do with our day-to-day work, where we are still working on projects for our clients. So whenever a pro bono initiative come along, sometimes we look at whether we can do a good job out of it. And for me, I always feel that a kind gesture is not based on how big or how small the gesture is. Sometimes the small things do matter more. So for us, we took this on because we like the idea, and we felt that based on our intuition, we feel that maybe the public will resonate positively to it. And we just gave it a go because we don't have a lot of time. So we thought, okay, let's take a week and just get this initiative out, and at the same time practice some sort of like doing creative work at the same time, showing some kindness to the riders. And that's what we did.
Now, we've seen the posters, they bear tongue-in-cheek messages like, you make my day bloom even though I'm stuck on Zoom, and ride safe so we can ride this out together. It took just a week to produce 24 of these different posters. What was the creative process like? What was the inspiration behind these light-hearted messages?
So what happened is how the way we collaborate in the office is all 15 of us, when we got together, it was like we just talk about things that we feel that is something that is more lighthearted, because in a time like this where everything is quite high strung and times are uncertain, and you can read on news and even on reports that people are getting impatient. So we thought that if we can do this direction in a more lighthearted way, it will be much better. So that was exactly what we did. As for how the headlines come about with some of those very key lines, of course, thanks to some of our good writers in our office, and also some of us who are not good writers, but we can have a rough direction of what we want, and we work together with the writers in delivering the message. So that's what we did.
Well, thank you so much, Pann, for sharing with us the whole process of it. We were speaking to Pann Lim, the creative brain behind the colourful thank you posters to show appreciation to delivery riders working hard during this circuit breaker period.
Before we go, here's a reminder that tomorrow is your last day to submit your entries to the Straits Times Colour Challenge. 5 readers stand a chance to win $5,000 each. For the whole of last week, there were illustrations in the live section, and all you have to do is colour all 7 artworks and submit them together. More details are in the description below if you're watching us on YouTube.
Now, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, do tap on the red subscribe button down below. Once again, I'm Haryanto Diman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.